All right, I'll get started slowly but surely. Um, First things first, I'd like to thank everybody for attending today's webinar on doing business with foreign governments. Before jumping right into it, I'll just touch on some of the agenda items for this webinar. First, likely to briefly introduce myself. My name is Matthew Lariviere, and I'm a senior export advisor on the customer acquisition team at CCC, based between Ottawa and Montreal, and have been with CCC for just over 7 years now in a variety of roles. And currently, my team and I on the customer acquisition team are responsible for, as the name would suggest, business development and customer acquisition, but as well as the onboarding of new exporter accounts. So any companies coming in and asking questions about how CCC can potentially assist them. I think that a good way to think about my team and I is really as the front door for all new companies. So that's a little bit about me. And now just to go over quickly some agenda items. I thought I would quickly just put up on the screen here a brief summary of what we'll be covering in today's webinar for the next 50 minutes or so. First is the size of government procurement markets and what we're seeing, some trends we're seeing, what areas of spending is happening around the world. I'll touch a little bit on what is government-to-government contracting and CCC, of course, when and why to use government-to-government contracting, selling to the U.S. military, as well as selling to foreign governments, and finally, how to start working with CCC. What are some of the next steps, the ideal customer profile that we have, a little bit about our onboarding process, and some tools to assist you in your business development opportunities. So without further ado, just to set the stage, public contracting is the world's largest marketplace, right? So for context, one in every $3 is spent by a government on a contract, or one in every $3 spent by a government on a contract is with a private company. So just by quick definition here, government procurement or public procurement refers to the process by which governments purchase goods, services, and works from the private sector. 13 trillion is obviously a staggeringly large number. I think the important takeaway from this is the massive global opportunity that this presents for Canadian companies. And just for context, the OECD public procurement, well, according to the OECD, rather, public procurement accounts for about 12% of GDP and 29% of government expenditures in OECD countries. And we're seeing this number grow. Public procurement expenditure as a share of GDP is increasing significantly across OECD countries over the last decade. So, what this all means for companies is that companies that are seeking to either diversify their income, their customer base, or access new markets would be well suited to familiarize themselves with government procurement processes. Now, in terms of access to some of this segment of the economy, it should come as no surprise that government procurement often favors local suppliers. However, it's becoming more widely accepted that increased competition from foreign suppliers, such as Canadian companies, in foreign markets, can put downward pressure on costs, giving taxpayers more value for money. And the Canadian government has worked tirelessly to improve market access for Canadian companies to access some of these government procurement markets of other nations. And we'll find free trade agreements where there are chapters dedicated specifically to government procurement. For example, the chapter in CETA, which was the Canadian-European Comprehensive Economic Trade Agreement, gives Canadian companies a comprehensive and favorable access to the EU procurement market, more than any other G20 country, right? So it's something to definitely be mindful of. And then also, it's good to be aware that Canada is a signatory to the WTO Government Procurement Agreement, the GPA they call it, which gives Canadian companies free trade protections to participate in foreign federal procurement markets. And you can find more information on some of these trade agreements all on Global Affairs website. It's all listed out there. What is the opportunity that exists for Canadian companies vis-a-vis certain markets. So would encourage you to consult that webpage. Now just moving into, the size of some of these markets, as I mentioned previously, public procurement accounts for an average about 12% of GDP and 30% of government expenditures. So you might be asking yourself, what is it that governments are buying and what are some of the trends that, might exist for Canadian companies? I think first off, an important element to note is that um, opportunities exist at all levels of government, meaning if we take the EU public procurement market, for example, there are more than 250,000 public contracting authorities just in the EU. These contracting authorities include city councils, regional authorities, public regional governments, utilities, state-owned enterprises, national governments, and institutions. And these entities spent approximately $2 trillion worth of goods and services, which accounted to, close to 14% of the EU's total GDP. So I think what all this means is the best practice is to look beyond just federal procurement and see what exists at the subnational level as well, because there are opportunities there and they are open for Canadian companies more often than not. Now, looking at some of this information, some things stood out, and I'll just share them in rapid fire here. Out of the $13 trillion total that I referenced earlier, over 10 trillion is spent by just by 16 countries. China is the largest procurer, excuse me, at 4.2 trillion. The US, by contrast, spends less than half of that at 1.8 trillion. 14 countries spend between the $100 billion mark and the 1 trillion per year. And in descending orders, these would be Japan, Germany, India, France, UK, Indonesia, Canada, Italy, South Korea, Australia, Brazil, Netherlands, Russia, and Spain. And the rest of the world spends just over 2 trillion per annum, right? So this is not meant to discount countries that are not in the top 16 of global spend. In fact, the opposite. If anything, often smaller markets are less crowded with competition. And in terms of absolute numbers, these are still incredibly large opportunities. And, you can just take two blocks of this world, the Indo-Pacific region and Latin America, where the Canada brand is incredibly strong, and Canadian companies would certainly be well suited to look at markets like this, notwithstanding the fact that some of these countries may not be in the top 16, right? So just something to be mindful of is that less crowded markets can often be a source of opportunity. Now, in terms of what it is governments what governments are buying, couple points is that public procurement is used across all government spending functions, right? From health to environmental protection, public safety, and economic affairs which would be comprising of infrastructure, transport, anything communications, energy, and related sectors. So it really is all encompassing. And according to OECD data, health expenditures represented the largest share of public procurement spending, averaging around 30% across OECD countries. And just as recently as 2019, we have the data here. And in countries like Italy, Japan, and the Slovak Republic here, almost 45% of public expenditures were in the health sector. And an interesting way to look at the data here we have on the screen is to look at the spending as a percentage of GDP, because I think that tells a different story than absolute numbers. Spending as a percentage of GDP can sometimes be a better indicator of areas of which governments are prioritizing. For example, if we just spotlight here public safety category, right? We see Switzerland and Croatia in the top 5. This insight would not be available if we looked at absolute numbers only. Of course, these countries wouldn't be there. And looking at the 38 OECD member countries, there's many top spenders, right? So I think the important takeaway here is that when we look at sources of opportunity, absolute numbers are great, but sometimes looking at percentage of the GDP, for example, in the education space, we're seeing Switzerland and Iceland In the housing and community amenities, we're seeing Bulgaria and Romania. In the defense space, we're seeing the United States, Israel, but also countries like Estonia in the top 5. This can really be a really useful indicator for companies in that space to know which countries are prioritizing some of their spend, and can be a good insight, a valuable insight rather, to look at these markets. So I thought I'd just share that as a little bit of a best practice. Now, moving into the About CCC portion of this webinar, I'll try to provide a brief overview of some of our programming and frame it all around how we help Canadian companies. So for those that don't know, CCC is Canada's government-to-government contracting agency, meaning we are a federal crown corporation, part of the trade portfolio, with perhaps our more widely known partners at the Trade Commissioner Service and Export Development Canada. But in a nutshell, what makes CCC unique vis-a-vis our partners at the TCS and EDC is that CCC is able to sign commercial government-to-government contracts with other nations, committing the Crown or the Government of Canada to a commercial contract with a foreign government buyer. It's a bit of a mouthful, but what that means is that CCC can sign contracts with, for example, the Ministry of Defense in Peru, and then subcontract that work back to a Canadian company. So this ability to sign contracts with a foreign nation is absolutely unique to CCC vis-a-vis our partner, but also it is a unique mechanism that only really exists in a handful of countries around the world. So, largely in some G7 countries will have this mechanism. So the point here is that, Canadian companies should take full advantage that this arrangement exists, should it be beneficial for some of their international business pursuits, because it's not every country that has this mechanism set up. And that's a little bit of what the government-to-government arrangement is. Now, for over 75 years, just to provide a little bit more context, CCC has helped Canadian businesses secure billion dollars worth of contracts with state, national governments, municipal governments around the world. Between 2018 and 2023, we facilitated close to $8 billion worth in successful commercial contracts with governments in over 30 countries. So, really, in terms of the sectors that we can support, we like to say that we're sector agnostic at CCC, meaning we can work in pretty much every sector with a handful of exceptions. But where we see the strongest demand for this government-to-government arrangement is typically going to be in sectors where the procurement is of national or strategic importance. This is where it really merits this government-to-government arrangement versus a direct commercial sale. So you can think of areas like aerospace, clean technology, defense, infrastructure, ICT, so information communication technology, but also other sector more recently that have come online, such as health and agriculture in the context of food security. So those are largely the sectors that we see the most demand in. Now, on this slide, we have a sample of companies that we work with, and really the goal of this slide is to give you a sense of the breadth and scope of the types of projects that we often participate in here. First up on the screen top left, we have Group Helios with a rehabilitation project for the Guahimia storm and sanitary water waste sanitation system in the DR. Another example would be Aecon with the close to $500 million project in Bermuda for the new airport in the city of Quito. It was a new airport terminal there. Another example, and not as large of a transaction, would be Tarragon. This is an SME. They had a wastewater treatment management at the U.S. Marine Corps, and also to waste management from waste management to energy production with the U.S. National Parks. Another example would be Bell Helicopter with a series of helicopters to the Philippine Department of National Defense. Same with Montenegro. CBN, Canadian Bank note, is a good example of where they provided national lottery systems in the Honduras and El Salvador. And most recently, a contract with Campotex for the delivery of potash to the Bangladesh Agricultural Development Corporation. And again, that's in the context of food security. So quite a vast and diverse set of companies that we work with and in various sectors. So the point is, really we like to say that we're sector agnostic. So we are absolutely happy to look at opportunities across multiple places. But this is where we're seeing this is a good representation of the type of work that we're doing. In terms of the services that we're offering to Canadian business, and I touched on a little bit earlier here, is that there's a few different programs and services as it relates to how we help exporters in general, right? So our flagship programming are the two boxes here you see on the right. And this is what I was describing a moment ago, where we create these government-to-government contracts, also known as intergovernmental contracts. And this is our flagship programming, but we also offer practical advice, referrals to some of our portfolio partners, and we provide tools in the context of what we call our advisory services here, totally free of charge. This is when a company calls in and has a question, one of our export advisors will be happy to speak with them and point them in the right direction. Additionally, CCC manages a database of over 1 million bid opportunities from various federal, state, and municipal governments in the world. And that's totally free of charge. You can access this database on our website. It's called the Global Bid Opportunity Finder. You can navigate that through cc.ca. And really, that's a free tool for Canadian companies to use to find some of the different RFPs that are being posted by governments around the world. That's largely what how we help companies, and I'll go in subsequent slides and drill down into each one of those in a little bit more detail. But the first flagship program that we have here is our International Prime Contractor. And this is a fee-based program where we create government-to-government contracts with foreign government buyers to help Canadian companies win more international public sector contracting opportunities. And again, this is for all markets and all levels of government. And I think that the easiest way to explain how exactly it works in practice is to describe it in function of the value proposition. And important to note is that the value prop is really twofold, right? You have a series of benefits for the Canadian business, but you also have a series of benefits for the foreign government buyer. So for the Canadian business, working with CCC provides the exporter this unique ability to provide their customer, that foreign government client, a Government of Canada guarantee of contract performance. Now, as you would expect, this goes a long way in the eyes of the government buyer, as it significantly de-risks their procurement. This foreign government entity is now not just doing business with SME out of Canada, they now are doing business with the Government of Canada, and it elevates the transaction to a government-to-government level. So really brings a lot of credibility to the transaction. Additionally, the selling process is accelerated, which is a big advantage for the Canadian company, in that our unsolicited government-to-government proposal approach gives the buyer the ability to procure from Canada on a directed basis without having to run a lengthy and competitive procurement process, which is of great benefit to the Canadian company, because they're not going through a lengthy RFP process, which is for obvious reasons something that would be much more beneficial to go direct. For the Canadian exporter as well, working through CCC with this government-to-government mechanism mitigates a series of risks to the pursuit. CCC as prime contractor, we reduce the political risk, the corruption, human rights risk, payment risk, and we also leverage the Government of Canada network to help navigate what is otherwise a complex government procurement decision-making authority. So what that all means is we certainly leverage our embassies and our high commissions with the boots that we have on the ground over there to help getting a little bit more context around what the procurement authority looks like over there, and any insight we can have, we certainly leverage our partners at the Trade Commissioner Services and our embassy. Now just moving on to the benefit or the value proposition rather for the foreign government buyer. One thing that I'll note, however, is that any benefit to the government buyer ultimately is, of course, an indirect benefit to the exporter as it differentiates their offer. So anything that is benefiting the buyer ultimately is benefiting the Canadian exporter. So, you'll hear things like facilitating faster procurements. Often governments can procure on a direct government-to-government basis using a simpler and faster acquisition process. CCC will satisfy urgent and compelling needs with an unsolicited proposal from our, with our quite nimble and flexible contracting approach, which is a great benefit to the government buyer because they can get what they want essentially immediately. CCC also will reduce the procurement or contract risk for the government buyer. Involving us reduces the risk really to all parties, but by virtue of CCC being involved in the mix, they know that we've done a comprehensive due diligence on the Canadian supplier from a technical, managerial, and financial aspect, knowing that, and we also promote responsible business practices. So it does bring a lot of credibility and a lot of assurance to that foreign government buyer that they're dealing with a reputable Canadian firm, that's ultimately going to be delivering on the contract. And then also, by virtue of CCC being involved in the mix, we can help assist in attracting financing to the deal. So some governments may not have the funds in their coffers to be able to pay directly for what it is they're looking for, and they're looking to finance that on the open market. CCC can certainly assist in working with our network of commercial lenders and export credit agencies to participate in the said transaction. And by virtue of CCC being involved as well, it's often that often we'll find more favorable terms or conditions may present themselves because the contract is de-risked. So that's a little bit in a nutshell about what the benefit is for the buyer. But again, I would note that, again, anything that is of benefit to the buyer ultimately is trickling down and benefiting the exporter, in that it differentiates their offer versus a competitor on the international stage. And just a simplified visual that is meant to illustrate this government-to-government contracting process and all of its parts is, as you can see here, there are a number of parties involved, right? At the top, we have the Canadian exporter, we have the foreign government buyer at the bottom, CCC in the middle, and then a series of, in two contracts. So if we begin with the Canadian exporter at the top, we see that the government buyer receives directly the goods and services from the Canadian exporter. And this would happen, at the moment that the contract has been signed and it's time to deliver on various areas of the contract. But between these two elements, we have two contracts, right? First is the prime. It's the lower one there, where CCC works with both the exporter and the buyer to negotiate a mutually agreed upon contract. And then in turn, what's happening is that CCC then creates a back-to-back or a mirror contract that flows all of these obligations from the prime contract back down to the Canadian company. Now, this mechanism is what helps Canadian companies win more international business abroad. It's this government-to-government mechanism that has that legal effect of being signed in the name of the government of Canada, and comes with the performance comes with a performance guarantee on the contract from the government in Canada. And this is a bit of a visual depiction of how that actually looks like, from a contracting perspective. And here up on the screen, I'll just share a few quick examples of some media coverage and announcements that CCC has gotten as of late. And I'll just highlight one of them here as a letter of intent that CCC signed with CCC for Canadian firefighting expertise. And since that letter of intent was signed, CCC is proud to announce that it had secured a $43 million contract with the Ministry of Defense in Argentina for 6 helicopters manufactured by Bell Textron Canada. And this government-to-government contract will allow the Argentinian government to replace its aging fleet of Airbus Alouette aircraft and replace it with the Canadian-made Bell 407 helicopters, which will serve in high-altitude search and rescue missions conducted by the Argentinian Air Force and Army. So, you know, I think the point I'm trying to get across here is that CCC signs a various letters of intent or memorandums of understanding, MOUs, with different governments around the world. And, you know, what often comes out of that is business development opportunities for Canadian companies. So I would always be mindful of keeping an eye out on some of our media releases as we start to highlight some of these opportunities. Now, just want to quickly share some of the success factors that we see with the International Prime Contracting Service, and some of the elements that, you know, impact success. First is the deal size. You know, the average deal size is going to be between $5 and $50 million. CCC still supports smaller deals. You know, it is possible, and we certainly have done it. But where we see, again, the most success is going to be in that range of $5 to $50 million. Also, buyer interest is, as you would expect, quite important. Buyers that are clearly time pressured or don't have the time or interest to run a full competition, or that can go a long way in terms of the value proposition of a G2G arrangement. A previously failed procurement is also a bit of a good signal for CCC to know that success could happen, in that you know, a previously failed procurement is, again, yeah, it's a signal that government to government could be well appreciated by the foreign government client. Another element to note is that, you know, a lack of knowledge of unsolicited proposals or government to government exceptions from the buyer side within their own procurement regulations can happen. And, you know, exporters, Canadian companies such as yourselves, have a role to play here in terms of educating your customer that they on their ability to go government to government and to use this mechanism. And of course, we're there to help and support through that process. But you know, often governments don't even know, or often individuals within governments and the procurement authority might not know of some of the exemptions. So it's just important to be mindful of the possibilities there, where government to government can work. Also, you know, turnkey is king, right? So most buyers need full spectrum solutions, and that's where the government to government mechanism really thrives, is in these full spectrum turnkey solutions. Niche products are offering like widgets, or, you know, requiring later integration, sometimes are less favorable to the government to government approach, but not always. But just something to be mindful of is, you know, governments, again, want that turnkey solution. And from a CCC perspective, teams are great, but really we encourage one lead Canadian exporter is very much encouraged. So that would be the Canadian company with the strongest balance sheet, the best track record of success. And then from there, they would formulate a series of subcontractors below them to deliver on the work. That's because, you know, from a risk perspective, CCC prefers to work with a lead Canadian company versus, let's say, a joint venture or a consortia. That doesn't mean that we can do it, and we can certainly explore, but our preference is definitely to be working with one strong Canadian company. So that concludes the first portion of the webinar, and just moving into the second piece here, the US DoD portion. And I'll be talking a little bit about how Canadian companies can sell into this market, and really the privileged access that Canadian companies enjoy, and some of the areas of demand. And, you know, spoiler alert, if there's one takeaway I want you to have from this portion of the webinar, is that the US DoD is not only for defense contractors, right? So the US Department of Defense buys everything from office furniture to medical supplies. And, you know, we've seen a lot of success in some of these areas that are your non-traditional defense contractors. And I would encourage Canadian companies that, you know, that are, you know, making essentially whatever it is that they're selling to consider this market, because it is very possible the US DoD buys it. Now, just first off, a couple points of contrast between this other program that I described and the US DoD one. First, the US DoD is a program that's the US DoD prime contractor, excuse me, is a program that's funded by the government of Canada, meaning CCC does not charge a fee. So it's totally free to use for the Canadian company and for the foreign buyer. I'll note as well that the general way in which a deal develops with the US Department of Defense is a little bit different. Here, companies are responding to an RFP in a competitive procurement process versus in the former, where it was through typically 9 times out of 10 an unsolicited directed basis. So there is that difference of nuance there. And then also the US DoD program, the one that I'm going to be talking about now, is much more accessible to SMEs. So the threshold to participate in this is much lower. Here, we're looking only for a contract size of $250,000 or more. So again, much more accessible to SMEs. And then lastly, this agreement, this Canada-US Defense Production Sharing Agreement, or DPSA for short, stipulates that Canadian companies are considered a domestic source of supply in the US and can bid on US DoD contracts on an equal and competitive footing with a US supplier. And this is a unique access that no other country enjoys. And it's all because of this Defense Production Sharing Agreement, DPSA. It's an agreement that dates back to 1956, and you can find more information on it on our website, and it's all written there. But one thing to note is that it certainly is it is something that Canadian companies enjoy that the rest of the world doesn't. So really, it is privileged access, and I would encourage everyone to take advantage of it. So for those asking, why they should consider this market, there's some obvious reasons, but as I mentioned earlier, Canadian companies are seen as the domestic source of a domestic supplier, and that's all part of the defense federal regulations supplement. I won't go into the details here, but basically your proposal is viewed as a domestic supplier, and again, given that domestic consideration as a U.S. firm. And as you're starting to look at some of these opportunities and you see things like in the RFP process, in the solicitation documents, you see things like open to domestic only. When that is written, that actually means US and Canada. So just something to be mindful as well. Domestic does not just mean US. And again, CCC is always happy to advocate on your behalf as you start to look at some of these opportunities and wish to participate. So we have folks that are available to assist with that. That leads me into the next question here. The next point here is, we have a network, or a team rather, of contracting experts that are here to help answer any questions along the way through this, sometimes complex government procurement process. We also will review your proposal and perform a due diligence in order to be able to provide that guarantee of contract performance to your customer. So it is a benefit in that we offer a performance guarantee to the US DoD. And then lastly, we certify your price is fair and reasonable, which eliminates the need for you to present costing data and pricing data that would conform with US accounting principles. So it allows you to keep that data in Canada and not share that with the US. CCC will do that on their behalf. So again, it's just an added benefit of working with CCC in this market. So now, in terms of what the US is buying, we support acquisitions from Canada from over 20 procurement offices. Some of the offices that we partner with include the DLA, or the Defense Logistics Agency, the US Army Procurement, US Navy, Air Force, DLA Troop Support, and even DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. And up on here on the screen, you see some spending by category, and these slides will be shared around at the end, so you'll have access to these. But I'll just highlight that in 2022, the Office of the U.S. Undersecretary of Defense outlined 14 critical technology areas of national security, and Canadian companies would stand to benefit even further for those operating in these U.S. DoD priority areas. And all of this, again, information is available on our website on our U.S. DoD page. But I'll just rapid fire go through some of these priority sectors. Biotechnology advanced materials, microelectronics, renewable energy, generation and storage for energy, directed energy, quantum, AI, critical minerals, advanced computing software, hypersonic, next-gen wireless tech, integrated network systems, space technology, human-machine interfaces, and integrated sensing and cyber. And again, just to close off on that point, we'll have all of these listed on our website. And just being mindful that the U.S. does run many innovation challenges in this sector as well. So a good way to get your foot in the door in the U.S. is via these sectors, is through some of the innovation challenges put on by some of the innovation ecosystem partners of the DoD, like the Defense Innovation Unit or others. And these are all places where companies looking to make their first inroads in the U.S. can certainly take advantage of. So going back to my earlier point is that the US DoD buys, massive volumes of non-military goods, such as food, medical equipment, and, construction supplies. And Canadian companies work with CCC to provide goods and services like this all the time. And I just wanted to put a few examples here up on the screen, and I'll just highlight one of them here, which is in July, just as recently as July, CCC was pleased to announce that it was awarded a fixed price contract with the United States Department of Defense to provide multiple low-profile forklifts manufactured by Ontario-based Lift King Manufacturing. So, quite interesting story. A company making forklifts now all of a sudden is finding itself selling to the U.S. Department of Defense. So again, point being is that the US DoD buys everything that really a country would buy. So certainly look at them as a viable target market, even if you're not a traditional defense contractor. So in terms of next steps, and you might be wondering how to begin working with CCC, I'll just highlight that we have a team, my team and I, as I mentioned right up off the top, that is really dedicated to responding to any inquiry that companies have, and going through the entire onboarding process and making and just trying to align some of our service programs and services to your reality and your needs. So we are available, and we're happy to take any requests as they come along. So we do have a open door policy. Anytime companies have a question, feel free to send a note via our contact us page on our website, and we are available to meet with you either one-on-one, virtually, or in person, whatever works. But we have a team dedicated to this. And for the purpose of the onboarding process, I'll just focus on the first two steps here that you see up on the screen. CCC's onboarding process typically will begin with a discovery call with one of our advisors. But here, what we're trying to get to is a pre-qualification of the fit, right? And this would be really the next step of working with CCC. And this is a mandatory checkpoint as part of CCC's responsible business conduct framework, and keeping in line with CCC's code of conduct and business ethics, is that prospective customers will begin by completing a due diligence questionnaire. And not to scare anyone with a series of paperwork, but what we'll be looking at is to do a pre-qualification, if you will, or a review of some of the elements of your business that would include technical, managerial, and financial, and just some of the things that we'll look for, in that first pass, just to make sure that we're managing your expectations in terms of how we can help, is a sufficient technical expertise to meet the requirements of international projects. Meaning essentially like, do you have a track record of success with this product or service? Also, from a managerial perspective, we want to see that there's a management team in place that's been there for a little bit of time, that has the capability to carry out the business over the life of the contract. Meaning, has this company been around for a year or 2 years, if not more? These are some of the things that we'll want to look at. And then also from a financial perspective, 2 elements coming to to mind here are going to be the company has an understanding of the risks of insolvency during the contract period, and or rather we have an understanding of that and to manage that, and then also just adequate capacity to meet the cash flow demands of the project. So just a quick rule of thumb and certainly not a rigid one is that we like to see companies that have at a minimum double the size of revenue versus the size of project that they're looking at, right? So if you're a $20 million company, annual turnover per year, you should be looking at about a $10 million size project for CCC to feel comfortable. Certainly the inverse would be a bit of a challenge. Now, of course, there's wiggle room on both those sides, but we like to see a 2-to-1, 3-to-1 ratio. So before I close things off here, if you're able to recognize yourself in some of these characteristics here, we are absolutely recruiting new Canadian companies to work with. So if you've got a product or services that you think governments buy, you got the capacity, the financial capacity and strength to pursue some of these deals that I described earlier, more than 2 years worth of sales and a track record of selling abroad or plans to sell internationally, certainly let us know and we'll be happy to explore how we can work together. And for any other information regarding our onboarding process or any of the materials that I discussed today, I would encourage you to visit our corporate website, www.ccc.ca. There we have a series of exporter guides, product pages, best practices for all government sales. And for all other questions, I would encourage you to visit our Contact Us page on our website. There, just filling out a quick form, and one of our export advisors will get back to you in a couple days and set up a follow-up call to have that discovery call to see how we might be able to work together. But really, thank you very much for participating. It was a pleasure. I think we have a few minutes left here. Just looking up here on the Q&A section. So CCC's ability and experience assist with U.S. and UK classified programs. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the U.S. DoD, there certainly are instances where a certain opportunity or a certain RFP would be only available to domestic firms in the U.S. and it would actually say U.S. and it would exclude Canada, and it would be written in the RFP or excuse me in the solicitation. These are less common examples, but it does every so often happen. So, we may be precluded from participating in certain RFPs, but largely, we have full access to some of these classified programs in the US. UK, a little bit different. I would say a little bit less experience there, but, no reason why we couldn't look at it. From a CCC perspective, UK is definitely a market we can work with. So if there's something that you want to chat about, we would be available to have that conversation. Not a problem.
Excellent. Can you go ahead and read the next question too? I'm not quite sure if everybody can see everyone's questions.
Yes.
Thank you.
Of course. Good point. At what point of the life cycle does CCC get involved to support a Canadian entity? At what point of the contract negotiation only? And is there a threshold of annual ARR to qualify for support from CCC? Okay, so a couple things there. So depends on the business line, but as a rule of thumb, I would say it's never too early. So the sooner the better. Do let us know if there's an RFP of interest that you're looking at with respect to the US. So just focusing on the US for a second. The sooner the better. We want to know about it because we want to be able to pave the way for Canadian participation, should that be potentially a challenge. So do let us know. For the rest of the world, we get involved right up from the beginning, right? Ideally in the scoping discussions when, you're having chats with the procurement officers on the buying side about your solution and possible procurement methods. That's when we want to start floating the idea that a G2G mechanism exists. Should this be of interest, we want to start planting those seeds. So the sooner the better. In terms of the threshold, we're not looking for any minimum in the ARR, but we are looking for again that ratio, right? So we want to see at at a minimum, a 2-to-1. So we want to see double the size of revenue versus the size of the project. So again, if we're talking about a US $250,000 opportunity, you know, it'd be great if the company was doing an annual turnover of about, you know, $500,000 a year at a minimum. But, you know, assuming we're talking about the rest of the world, there where projects are around the $10 million mark, we're going to want to see a company that's doing, you know, $20 to $30 million a year. And that's again, case by case, but that's just a general rule of thumb. And thanks for the question. So it's a good question. Yeah. Do Canadian companies qualify for innovation programs like DIU, AFWorks, and SoftWorks? It's a great question. How do I answer this one? So case by case. Those innovation programs like the DIU, the Defense Innovation Unit that I described earlier there in the presentation, those would not be under the DPSA agreement. So CCC would not participate as a prime on those. But I think what you're asking is, can Canadian companies access this irrespective of CCC? And that is case by case. And there, what I would encourage you to do is, if there's one of interest, and you know, social media is a great avenue to find some of these opportunities. A lot of these innovation units have LinkedIn pages, and they publish content regularly on there. Is to write to the Canadian Embassy in Washington, the trade section, and let them know that you have a certain interest, and they will be able to help you assess whether or not it is open for Canadian participation. And if it's not, sometimes all it takes is an email to some of the folks over there and letting them know that, you know, you've got an interesting solution, and maybe they do want to open it up to Canada. So really case by case, that's how I would answer it. But do leverage the Trade Commissioner service for some of those innovation programs. They are your boots on the ground to help you with that.
Thank you. You can go to the next one if you want. I think scrolling up's the way to go, above Kevin's question, which you started with. So I think we're on Desiree's.
I don't see that. I see. Do you involve in the foreign government tender from beginning to end? Yes, I guess we absolutely do. From the beginning, again, for our international side, there, you know, we ideally we are CCC is included at the earliest stages. And at the end, sure, absolutely, because CCC financially administers and contract manages the project. So we are there all until the end, until successful delivery. It says, will the slide deck and recording be made available?
Yep, it absolutely will. We'll be sending those out for anyone who can attend the full session, or if there's colleagues that you would like to share it with.
Perfect. Okay. Well, and I know we are mindful of time here. I think
there's a couple. There's a quick one about. Is there any considerations for early stage startups with yes. That one with a Bino Loop?
Yeah, let me have a look here. Yeah, so that would be a challenge, right? Because the matter of fact is that because CCC is offering this performance guarantee and committing the government of Canada, the Crown, to performance, to a guarantee of contract performance, we have to in turn, CCC, do a quite rigorous due diligence process on some of those elements, technical, managerial, and financial. So therefore, working with startups early stage without that track record of success can present some challenges. You know, what we do in these scenarios sometimes is we encourage these companies to partner with some of the larger OEMs in this space and be part of the supply chain, or again, to look at some of these innovation programs out of the US, like the DIU, AFWorks, and SoftWorks, and there are many acronyms and many others where their Canadian companies can participate. But then again, that would be outside of CCC's purview and outside of the performance guarantee.
Okay, just to kind of combine a few questions that are here. There's some questions about the value proposition of why should a company go government to government? What's the benefit for a Canadian company to go government to government?
That's a great question. Yeah, and my earlier slide, which we'll share around, I listed some of those, so you'll be able to reference it in our website. We have it too. But ultimately, government to government, to me, in a nutshell, it allows you to offer your customer a guarantee of contract performance. This is something you cannot buy in the marketplace. It is only offered by a handful of countries around the world. So it really is a differentiator in your proposal. It gives your customer peace of mind. It gives your customer, it lends a lot of credibility to your deal in that the government of Canada is standing in front of your proposal. So, long story short or short story long, it is a differentiator in your bid submission or in your business development process, and also, it accelerates the contracting process, right? So it gives you access to a procurement market on a directed basis that otherwise would have possibly had to gone to through a competitive process. So lots of benefits for the Canadian company.
Don't forget, we also help with all the paperwork too.
Yes. Yes.
The other thing here that I'm combining a few, Desiree's asking, is the DPSA minimum still set at $250 as well as is CCC participation at the minimum level still mandatory for DPSA?
Right. Okay. So I think what I'm being asked here is, so if it's less than $250,000, CCC will entertain it. Like, there's no reason why we cannot participate. It's just the requirement on the US side is only above $250,000. The DPSA only exists above 250K. What that means is if it's below 250, the US DoD does not need to include CCC, and you are not considered domestic source of supply. So, it's not from a CC, it's not imposed from CCC. This is imposed from the American side.
Okay, I think that's great. Last question. What is the position of CCC with sanctioned countries?
Yeah, so I mean, it's a good question, and we absolutely follow the lead of our colleagues at Global Affairs Canada, and we will typically consult the geographic desks or the embassies in advance to set pursuit, and of course keep the Canadian company in the loop as this all goes along. But long story short is that if if Canada doesn't have a trading relationship with that country, then neither will CCC.
Okay, I think that kind of concludes most of the questions.
Excellent. And if any questions come up along the way, don't be shy to send us a note on the Contact Us page. One of our advisors will be certainly happy to answer your questions.